Hi, it's Warren Huart here. Hope you're doing marvellously well. I'm sitting with the wonderful Johnny Kay. How are you, mate?
Good to meet you.
Good to meet you too. We've been talking a little bit off camera while Eric was backing up here, and the whole time I was like, no, save that. No, save that. So we have like 15 half conversations. I think The first one I was asking was like, so you're not in Chicago anymore? Because when I think of you, I think of that beautiful studio you had in Chicago.
Right. Heading to Nashville.
Yeah.
Little by little. And the studio building, I was in Chicago in two different spots. So I had moved from one big warehouse building to another. And the second building I owned for almost 10 years. And there was a lot of studios in there, some really great rooms and some cool
I remember
skyline
going
views.
online.
And,
the pictures were amazing.
yeah, it was interesting. Great place to work. There was a lot of great bands that had come in and out of there. Disturbed, Mark Tremonti had been in there. Shinedown did a song there. We had a lot of cool stuff going on there. Plain White Tees. You know, the list goes on. We had a lot of really fun things there. But you know, changes in the music industry, a big building with a lot of overhead.
Sure.
And the tenants were all studios as well.
Right.
And so it just, you know, it ran its course. And there was a time when there was a time when 3 rooms were booked and somebody was doing pre-production in another room, and the tenant, you know, there was a time when it was really, you know, going strong. But I guess like I said, it ran its course, and so it's going to be an office building.
Oh, wow.
I mean, it's not like Nashville where they're taking over Music Row and building condos, because, you know, it wasn't a historical music studio kind of a building. The building was an old cold storage building.
Oh, wow.
So the Schoenhofen Brewery. So it was thick insulated walls and all that. It was cool.
Perfect for a studio.
It was great.
Yeah.
So eventually going to relocate to Nashville.
So you're not fully relocated there yet?
No, but I have this old, beautiful white API.
Which I was talking to Cameron Webb about the other day. Who was lamenting it leaving and
my dear friend
returning.
Cameron had it for many years. And you know, kind of in advance of my moving to Nashville, the board had beat me there. So it's in the cave room at the House Blues Studios in Berry Hill.
Fantastic.
And sharing that room with T-Bone Burnett, which is kind of cool.
Very cool, yeah.
And just did my first session on the board, and it sounds as good as ever.
I mean, I've only seen pictures because he showed me pictures, and God, it's beautiful.
Yeah, it's something else, and it sounds as good as it looks.
And now he has a Trident, which you got from Nashville. So there you go.
Oh, yeah.
So there was some synergy there.
Yeah. Well, I'm heading to I'll be there tomorrow at Cameron's.
Oh, fantastic.
So I'll get to check out his new, I always like Tridents.
Yeah?
Yeah.
That's a beautiful one. You got a great deal on it.
Yeah.
So you're eventually relocating to Nashville, everything there?
That seems like the plan as of now. Yep.
And are you already making records out there and just flying backwards and forwards?
I do a lot of stuff. I have a home studio.
Right.
And it's pretty comfortable just to do it there.
Right.
So I have bands come in and
this is in Chicago or in Nashville?
Well, it's in I live my house is outside of the city.
Right.
About 30 miles southwest. And it's a nice setting. There's a forest preserve right directly behind the house, and it's
beautiful,
wooded, and it's really nice and quiet. And so I've been recording. There's a building out, you know, an old converted kind of workshop / garage, and it's become a nice studio.
All right, great. So your home studio is a little bit more than that. It's
well, yeah,
very nice.
I've got a little Neve console in there, a 30, what is it, a Melbourne style console, but it's not a Melbourne, it's a 30, 315 or 30,
Right.
31. I don't know even what the numbers
I can't
are.
remember either at the moment, but I know what you mean.
I call it a Melbourne, but I was corrected and told
Yeah.
that it was a.
Sure.
It's a 12 channel. And
12
then
channel.
I've got a rack of 1095s.
Beautiful.
And
So you're tracking drums through the Neve?
yep.
Great.
Tracking everything through the Neves, pretty much.
Fantastic.
And some API stuff.
Now, you were talking earlier when we were off camera about tape, which was interesting. And the bit that I wanted to, and it's really hard to go back and recapture it, but I love it when you were like, well, I liked punching in on tape because I didn't want to have to keep moving around and cutting, and I wanted to keep you wanted to keep the momentum going in the session. Right.
Going back to we were talking about the sound of different interfaces and how they compared to tape. And then, I recall doing a lot of the things I do on Pro Tools on tape, like comping vocals.
Sure.
I would just record several takes on several different tracks and then use the mute buttons and faders, even if it was too hard to mute. I'd bounce them all to one track, and then I would just either fade or mute and build the track that way out of those. It's very similar to playlists on Pro Tools.
Sure.
Or, I didn't like cutting tape because I didn't like to slow down a session, and I didn't want to try to remember afterwards and put it back. I like to keep things flowing. So if we had a good take with a mistake, I would just have the drummer play along and just hit the record button, pop it in and pop it out. Quick, done.
Great.
So I had done some of that.
Well, it's also nice on tape. There's always that nice sort of blurring of edges. You sort of punch in on digital, and it can always be like a sort of horrible transient, especially in the early days of Pro Tools. Remember we always used to work in Destructive? Remember those days?
I don't remember. No.
You didn't work in Destructive?
I don't know. I don't even know what that is.
Oh, well, you used to, before we had playlists, they would always tell you, stay in Destructive, when they had the D on the record. Remember when they had the D? Yeah. Oh, dear. I'm feeling really old at the moment. And that would literally...
I was just late to the party in the Pro Tools.
It would erase what was underneath. So it would literally be the same as tape.
Okay.
But it didn't have that smoothness that tape had when you'd punch in and out.
Right.
Because you get those harsh transients coming in. But, like you were talking about earlier, the great thing about those Apertures, with the 8800s, is that
88,000.
88,000, sorry.
Right.
They had that sort of soft limit.
Right. You could switch on the old 88,000s, you could switch soft limit in individually per channel.
Yeah.
And I found that it was similar to tape.
Great.
With those in. And you use them, right?
Yeah, I still have mine on drums.
For that capacity.
Yeah.
I want to go back to that. I want to go that direction. Again, I want to try that.
I think just for me, it's like I don't know, I'm not a stick in the mud, but I know how to get a good drum sound using that. So I have no reason to change. It's really just as simple as that. If there was something that appeared like a massive change, then of course I would, but I find that works for my workflow. And especially these days, I work on a lot more stuff with a lot lower budgets. So I'm working on more things.
Yeah.
So having something to go to that works really well is much more important to me than anything else. Getting to solution quickly.
Recently, having sold the studio, I had to move the tape.
Oh, wow.
And there was hundreds of 2 inches.
Wow.
And it was a walk through memory lane. There were some disturbed reels.
Right.
And something as recent as Seven Dust, I can't remember what year. I think it was like around 2010, 2011 that I did that Cold Day memory record for Seven Dust. That was a reel of tape. And I thought, did I track... Morgan Rose is such a great drummer. I think I just tracked him to tape knowing that there wasn't going to be a mountain of editing and that I could do it quickly and efficiently.
That's fantastic.
And so I always had that Studer machine.
Which Studer?
A820.
A820.
I used to just run through it always, anyway, whether I was tracking a tape or not.
Ah, interesting.
It was always in the tracking room. So that the chain was always, the Neve and then the Studer and then to Pro Tools. And if I wanted to run tape, all I had to do was push record, but I used to just leave it on input. and run through the Studer electronics.
That's great. More transformers, more weight. Yeah.
Yeah. More is more.
More is more. Yeah. Well, all that extra weight and all those low mids, I mean, it definitely helps that, the I suppose, overused word, fatness. Did I just say that?
I don't know. I just thought I liked it better.
Yeah.
I compared it. I'm like, yeah, I guess it sounds a little nicer.
Right. Absolutely. So are you still in your new facility behind your house? Are you still using tape?
I don't have the tape machine there. Nope.
Right. Is that going to come?
No, I'm not going to. I think it's more of a temporary kind of a setup. And a lot of what I'm doing there is mixing. Although I have tracked some records there. And, but in that setup, it's just as direct as possible. It's microphones into mic pre's into the Pro Tools.
Right.
So it doesn't have that one extra stage.
Were you finding when you're mixing, are you mixing and staying in the box, or are you breaking out, or combination depending?
Yeah, I'm doing hybrid.
Hybrid?
Yep.
So
Pro Tools out through analog stack of compressors, and then through a summing mixer.
What's your summing mixer?
SSL Sigma.
Sigma, great.
And then out of the Sigma through the Neve console.
Nice.
And then back into Pro Tools.
Great.
So it makes quite an analog journey before it gets back.
Well, that's great.
I like this. I just like the, I tried a bunch of summing mixers. And the Sigma is pretty transparent, I think. It doesn't do too much, but it...
Is the Sigma you can pretty much integrate with Pro Tools as well? Isn't that kind of a beauty of it? That
I think you can automate, but I've got a 32, it's 16 stereo channels, and if you want to use them as a mono channel, it becomes a mono channel.
I see.
So it kills two.
I see.
So I don't really use the automation on the Sigma because it's basically groups.
I see.
There's too many tracks. I haven't mixed a 32 track. Nothing has 32 tracks anymore.
No, it doesn't. No, it doesn't.
Although some of the records on the 24, I used to have these records on 24 tracks that sounded giant.
Yeah.
Like, why do you need 100 tracks? I go back to some of my old recordings and I think, damn, those were great.
Right.
24 tracks. I had some good stuff on 8-track back in the day.
Shelley was just telling us that when he did the band, Music from the Big Pink, that the drums and the vocals were on one track. Because Levon's vocals were bleeding into the drums and vice versa. So they just gave up and said, we're going to do the vocals and the drums on the same track. And I referenced that record to make an album. And I was like, I'm so glad I didn't know that, because I just would have given up.
Oh, man.
Because I'm struggling to get it to sound as good, with like 72 channels and Pro Tools and everything. I can't make it sound as good as his record. And he's doing all the drums and the vocals on one track.
I did a record once, the band, back before, in the days when I was just a commercial studio, doing local bands. Mm-hmm. A band asked me, like, how much is a reel of tape? I said, it's about $150 at the time, something like that.
Sure.
I can't remember exactly, but around $150. They said, how long is the tape? I said, it's about 15, 16 minutes long. They're like, well, we've got, they came in and recorded a record in one day, an entire album live, all in the same room.
Yep.
And they only had enough money in the budget to buy one reel of tape. So we recorded drums to tracks 1 and 2, bass to 3, guitars to 4 and 5, vocals to 6 and 7, and like tambourines, percussion, horns. They had everything to 8. So, and things came in and out. So we did that on tracks 1 through 8, then repeated it on 9 through 16,
wow.
And then 17 through 24. So we had a live
40 minutes worth of music. 40 minutes. Yeah.
On one reel of tape. And it was great sounding. It really was.
That's fantastic.
So when I mixed the drums, I had the cymbals and the kick, everything had to be mixed on the stereo track. There was no individual drums. And it really did. It was cool.
That's
it
amazing.
definitely keeps you from over mixing your drums.
Yeah, absolutely. No flying in samples from that.
Right. So there was some things that, in the days before budgets that came out really great. So now when budgets are, cutting down, the budgets are tougher. I kind of think back to those days and how cool things were to record live. So I did a record out here at Energy Studios that's just come out called the Michigan Rattlers, and that was recorded drums, stand-up bass, acoustic guitar, and 2 vocal mics live in the room together.
Wonderful.
And it was just recorded all like that. There was a couple overdubs added afterwards, but the record was recorded live.
That's amazing.
In a day. An EP.
Great.
So it can be done.
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's tons of bleed. It's an acoustic guitar and a mic. There's bleed between the acoustic mic and the vocal mic because they're only this far apart. The drums were in there, and I tried to keep the drummer from bashing.
Sure.
But there's still drums in every mic.
Absolutely.
And so it was really hard and tricky to mix it.
Right.
But it worked.
Did you mix it in the same day?
No.
Okay.
No, I mixed it later. I added some, tracks, and we did a little post-production, but the core of the record was recorded in one day, live.
That's fantastic.
I like that. I think that bleed is, when people talk about, the records on tape back in the day, they sounded so much cooler or better, and I think, well, I've got a tape machine in line with the Pro Tools, and I can switch back and forth, and there's a difference, but it's not the major difference. I think a lot of it might have been just the way they approached records.
I think you're 100%
Recording live,
correct.
bleed, all that. Think about it.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's 100% correct.
So I did the record I'm working on now is done exactly that way. Tracked live, there's bleed all over. The bass amp and the guitar amp and the drums are in the same room. Playing at the same time.
Wasn't that also...
Goboed, but...
Yeah, isn't that allegedly Van Halen 1 and 2? They're setting up in the corner. And allegedly the bass, if you listen to it, is slightly panned to one side because it's bleeding more into the drum mics on one side than the other.
Could be.
Yeah. That was the legend. I'll have to ask the guys at Sunset what they remember.
Certainly the amps were on this side of the room right next to the one room mic, so I'm sure they're louder on that room mic. But I hadn't mixed this one yet. I'm still working on it. But I like that sound.
That's great. And so do you, with band like that, are you spending a lot of time on pre-production so that it's about capturing?
Yeah, just working on the songs and the band's rehearsing. We went to I was in the rehearsal room hanging out with earplugs, listening to the band play and then really enjoying what I was hearing there and saying, well, let's not mess this up. Bring the amps that you have from the rehearsal room to the studio. Let's set those amps up. Let's capture this sound. So there wasn't any big switch. Okay, we've got to get the studio drums. We've got to get this amp or that amp. We tracked it, captured the sound of the band.
It's fantastic.
And worked on the performances, but it was really, I like it. I like the way it sounds. And I tried to stick to that philosophy. I know that, and I will tell bands, I say, look, there's a lot of control room records out there. I want to make a studio record. I want the band to be in the studio.
Right.
And, there's trends, there's musical trends, but there's also your tastes and what you like, right?
Sure.
And there's a lot less of a likelihood if you record a record like that for the fans or anybody to say, wow, they sound so much better live.
Yeah, that's a very valid point because I hear that a lot. That's one of the biggest criticisms of pretty much anything.
Everybody says it these days.
Yeah.
It's like, well, if you didn't program your drums in a drum machine and use DIs instead of real amps.
And now we get the situation where you go and see a band live and they're playing off so many tracks that it just sounds like you're listening to the album through some PA speakers.
I like less tracks. Even if you have a ton of tracks on the recording, I like a band to play a little more live, less tracks.
Sure.
I don't It seems weird to me.
Plus, it's a valid, different experience. You're going to see a live performance of something as opposed to.
Right. But I will try to convince a band that we need more tracks on the record. Let's add some sounds in here.
Sure.
And they're like, well, how are we going to do that live? I've been on the other side of that argument.
Yeah.
And the band said, well, how are we going to do that live? And I said, look, live, you're jumping around on stage. You've got lights. You've got the energy of the crowd. You've got a giant PA. The record is just the record.
Sure.
I said, if this record was enough, why don't you go out and sit down on a stool and play with the house lights on then?
Right.
Think about that.
No, it's a very valid thing. I've been to shows that I've heard the live recording afterwards and been like, oh, that doesn't sound very good. I don't remember it being that way. I don't remember that guitar being out of tune. Just because it was like,
it's great. You don't
people
hear
jumping around, sweat flying everywhere. You're not focused on, oh, his E's a little flat.
Exactly.
You're enjoying the whole experience. It's great. So, who's the band you're working with? That you're doing that with?
Lucky Boys Confusion.
I don't know.
Chicago band. They were. I think they were an electro band, and this is kind of. They went on hiatus a while back, and they're kind of coming back. But they're a cool band, cool Chicago fixture.
Great.
Excited to be doing the record.
Well, I'm friends with Brad Wood, and so we talk about Chicago a lot. I mean, that's like
I bumped into Brad at AES.
Yeah, he was a great guy. And Chicago has a very, very strong scene, especially, during the 90s. There was a lot of dominant bands that came from there. So
it was cool. It seems, I don't know. Just, where is it now? I'd love to see Chicago come back.
Right.
But the live music scene, either I'm just not connected or it's just not there. But it doesn't seem like there's as many, bands coming up or struggling or whatever. I used to, or maybe it's just the internet has taken it away from the scene, because I used to see bands handing out CDs, or even before that, even cassette tapes back in the day. Flyers, come to our shows. And there were more venues. There were just a lot more venues for up and coming bands. And there was a lot more of a fan base that supported them.
Metro, wasn't it?
Metro's still there and going strong.
Yeah. Oh, that's good. So when I was in bands, that's where we'd play. We'd play the Metro.
Yeah. Great venue. The best. I think it's Chicago's single best venue.
Definitely. Yeah. It was like there was Tramps in New York, I remember, and then there was the Metro in Chicago. Those kind of like.
It's always magic to see a good show at the Metro.
Did you play in bands yourself? Did you come up as a musician?
Well,
what was how did you get where you got for the Chicago scene?
I was, just started playing guitar when I was a little kid, and jam with the kids in the neighborhood and then kids in high school and stuff, but never really, the band thing never really stuck. And then when I was in college, I came across a little Tascam Porta 1 in a music store, and I asked the guy, what's this thing? And he says, that's a, multi-track recorder. And I'm like, so what does it do?
Right.
He says, well, you can record on one track, and then you can play it back and record another track, and you can do 4. And if you want more than 4, you can bounce them down. Bounce them down? What does that mean? Well, you can record tracks 1 and 2 onto track 3, and then you record. I was like, this sounds like something I need to have. So that's where it began. But I was playing guitar. I was a decent guitar player.
How did that transition to recording other people?
Well, I guess at a certain point, I thought I had to do something with my life. And I still wasn't big on the whole band thing. I wasn't looking around to try to get into a band, but I had a passion for music and playing, and the 4-track was a fun toy, but I was frustrated with how, the sound quality. I thought I was going to be able to make a record on it, but it didn't sound as good as the records. So I started asking myself, well, where do I go from here to get it to sound like that?
Sure.
And that's how it began. So then I started thinking about equipment and reading and researching and looking into looking into how to get gear and working hard and saving money and trying to get loans and do all that stuff to get a studio together.
What was your sort of next step from the 4-track?
Well, I went from that 4-track, and then I got a board called a TAC Magnum.
And I don't remember the Magnum, but I had a TAC Scorpion.
Same, basically similar.
Those are great consoles.
So I had a TAC Magnum, and I got a Tascam 2-inch, and so I that was it.
The Tascam 2-inch?
Yeah,
oh,
an
wow.
ATR 80 2-inch. It was a great machine.
Wow.
When I got the Studer, because I thought that's what I needed eventually, when I was demoing a band called Disturbed, and they eventually got signed, and that's a whole nother story there. I got to hang on to the project barely, but the band, you know, the great guys, and really went to bat for me.
That's fantastic.
Having been the guy that demoed them,
What year are we talking?
They got signed in '99.
Yeah, that would have been a tough year to hold on to a project, so congratulations.
It was impossible. Seems like now you can hang on to a project because
because of the budgets.
Hey, we'll just take what you got.
Yeah, great.
Let's release those demos.
What, you mean I give you 30 grand and I own it? Sure. Yeah.
Well, yeah, there was a lot of name guys that I think the label had in mind that had track records, and the band was adamant that I stay on. So I think
that's a pretty career-defining moment.
You know, it was, I mean, I had gotten a couple other bands signed that year, and there was no discussion at all. The project, I lost both of those projects. And so to hang on to that one was and their career, the legacy that they've built.
Sure.
You know, we did the first record, and now 5 consecutive Billboard number ones later, they've, you know, the legacy has really become something amazing.
That is amazing.
And you know, and those were the guys that I think the work ethic and just the integrity that they have. I don't think a lot of bands would do that. Would tell the label, who's, you know, investing a lot of money.
A lot of money in those days.
Say it's our guy,
yeah,
or no deal kind of thing. I mean, they really kind of laid it down. And I think when the label heard the tracks, and it was one of those deals where, okay, we'll give you 3. First, when the label said, okay, let's give it a try, and then they were like, well, if we're going to do that, let's just release the demos. And I said, come on, I did these demos in a day with no money.
Yeah.
Give me a budget and let me see what I could do. So at that point, we did pre-production. We rehearsed real hard, and we took our time. The label was nervous about it. After a few weeks, like, what's going on? I'm like, well, we're getting ready to start. What? You know, I said, well, we're in pre-production. I'm working with the band, getting their performances to where I feel they need to be. We're recording on tape. That record was done to tape, The Sickness. So there was no, let's edit, or, you know, you actually had to play and sing in tune and play in time and all that. And that record sounds really tight. And people would say, oh, you Pro Tools that record. I'm like, well, no, it was recorded to tape and mixed off of tape.
You mixed it as well?
Andy Wallace mixed it, and he didn't want to mix off of tape. He liked to transfer to the digital, and I said, I think I've got the sounds really, really nice, and I'm worried about conversions and stuff. And I talked him into syncing up 2 machines. I had it on 48, you know, I had 2 machines synced up, and so we mixed that record off tape.
Is anybody getting the gravity of the fact that this is Andy Wallace in '99? This is at the peak of his success. It had Nevermind about 6 years, 8 years behind him.
Yep.
Yeah, he was.
No, it was.
He was the guy that was mixing every heavy rock record in those days.
Yeah.
So that's a big deal.
I didn't even know about it. I just, when I was there, when they told me I wasn't mixing,
right,
I was like, what do you mean I'm not mixing? I'm upset. They're like, we're getting Andy. They were all excited. We got Andy Wallace to mix it. I'm like, what do you mean?
You're like, I've got it sounding the way I want it to sound.
And, you know, it took a minute to really, and we did have it the way we wanted it to sound. I mean, really, the tracks were great. So the Andy Wallace mix, it took us a minute to, I remember with the band going to, I can't remember the mastering house, Sterling, I think it was, and having taken just the CD ref and having it mastered. We didn't have like the master version or anything, but we just wanted to see if we were missing something. So, you know, listening back, I love that record. It does sound a little tamer than the tracks.
Sure.
But I love his mixes. And you know, when you hear him on radio, when you hear it,
sure.
I think he gave it a chance to stand the test of time by, you know, doing what he does, his magic touch, whatever it is.
Did you get to sit with him when he was mixing?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
I've done that once, and I've never seen anybody mix that quietly. So I was like sitting there like, didn't want to breathe or, you know, make any noises and stuff.
I mean, I've heard those tracks a zillion times, so I'm going to sit there all day. But yeah, I would.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because I feel like that experience, and I had done a handful of records with him, several records, and always been there with him. I always had the opportunity to be hands-on. So that was the day when labels would pick you up in a limousine, take you to the airport. This was my first record, by the way. So I couldn't even get an indie label to answer the phone if I called up and said, hey, can I send you a CD sample of my work?
So how did the music that you had done, the demos, get in the hands of a label for Disturbed?
The band, they were just hardworking guys. They would send them. They would send them out. They'd package them up and send them to labels and then call. Did you listen? Did you listen? Did you listen? Eventually, you know, somebody did listen and like, hey, this is pretty good. And then people came out to see the band. I remember label guys by the droves coming out to see the shows. It was very exciting.
They would fly out to Chicago.
But yeah, guys were coming to Chicago all the time. And I got to meet a lot of label guys. And a lot of those guys are still, you know how label guys come and go, but it's interesting that it seemed like the guys that came out to see that band that were coming to Chicago, a lot of those guys are still in the biz.
Well, that's good.
Yeah,
it's good ears.
Interesting. Yeah.
That's good to hear because that's quite remarkable.
Yeah, some of the guys that, you know, that were, I feel like they discovered me kind of too, although there wasn't a huge amount of enthusiasm of me doing that record. I think based, you know, the budget, right? The budget's huge, and we got this guy who hasn't done any records.
Sure.
Yet. So they were happy when they heard the first round of tracks, just roughs.
Great.
And we took a lot of care to get those tracks sound. There was no mixing for the rough mixes. Literally, you put up the faders and send it, and it sounded. I got it to sound, the tracks to sound better than the mix demos.
Right.
So, you know, I think even Andy Wallace mentioned, you know, how well he liked the tracks, and that was a great compliment coming from him. And we had a lot of fun. I remember being in New York with the guys. And
where did he mix that? What room was he?
Soundtrack on the G+.
Oh, nice.
Very similar to the console that's here at Aftermaster.
Yeah.
In the next room.
Your ex console?
Yep. I sold that console to these guys here. And they're putting a lot of TLC and refurbishing it, and they did all the trim and beautiful, you know.
Wonderful. Well, we're going to come back and do a whole segue when they when they feel happy. Shelley's like, you're not quite ready yet. When it's the room's beautiful, and we're going to come back and do it.
It's looking pretty beautiful.
Yeah.
But you know, that board was in Chicago, overlooking the skyline of the city and the warehouse. That was a pretty nice spot for it.
Beautiful.
But yeah. So Disturbed, you know, went to bat, got me to do the first record, and then we did 2 more records after that together.
That's amazing.
So, good times.
But then records like Plain White Tees is a shift of genre, which is a good thing.
I was conscious about
Not being put into one particular category.
And I don't like that.
Yeah.
But of course, look, how many guys really do cross genres? It seems like
Not
it's
many.
a hard thing to do.
Mm-hmm. But the guys that we admire growing up are guys that have done multiple genres. Yeah.
Right. And I like a lot of different kinds of music. I'd like to have more opportunities doing different music in different genres, but it, people think, oh, this is your sound. But
Sure.
I would challenge you to say, well, Disturbed record sounds like the Plain White Tees record.
Oh, no.
Andy Wallace mixed one of the Plain White Tees records as well.
Oh, well.
So, but they don't sound the same at all,
No.
or even close.
Well,
I
yeah.
don't think you could say, well, this is a Johnny K record. I would like to think or aspire to the standard of it's more about the band and the music, and be more of a transparent producer.
Absolutely.
If I can hear a producer on the record, those aren't the producers that I look up to or like.
I agree. Growing up for me, it was John Leckie. He had been an engineer on Abbey Road, an engineer on All Things Must Pass. And then as a producer, he had done Stone Roses' first record.
Oh, I love that record.
Yeah. Cooler Shaker's first album.
And
Radiohead, The Bends.
Wow.
And I'm thinking Radiohead, Cooler Shaker, Stone Roses all sound just like the band.
Right.
Like the Stone Roses record is just so different for the time. It was like a breath of fresh air. So I remember
Was that
thinking,
the first album that they had?
their first album, yeah. Well, no, that's not their first album. Their first album was on a little label but that was their
album
first.
Was the one that had that
was his album. That's the one he did. Yeah.
Great bass groove in there.
Amazing. It's that I don't know if they were cognizant.
What's that song called? Fool's Gold? Is that the title?
Fool's Gold, yeah. Good memory.
I really love that. When I first heard that song, it was special.
It's really good. I'd always wondered, did they know the Doors? Were they huge Doors? Because you think of Peace Frog.
Oh, yeah.
That whole sort of Peace Frog groove is it's in that album in many, many different forms, sort of morphed.
That's a great record.
But such a beautiful band sounding record. It doesn't have just seems to be capturing the band. And then you go to the Bends. That's like the beginning of the Radiohead that we now love.
I think it's smart for producers, all young, aspiring producers. I would recommend you stay out of the way, especially when you have a great band in the studio.
Sure.
Sometimes the photograph is what you need.
Yeah.
Sometimes it isn't.
Yep.
Sometimes the overblown production is the way to go, but not always.
Right.
AC/DC, for instance.
Sure. And then Mutt's doing Def Leppard.
Right.
And I was talking to one of those guys who told me that he runs in, when he was working with me, obviously, he'd run in and he sings the harmonies and says, okay, go and copy my harmonies. So that's a big producer there, bringing in and coming up with that sound.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, no, I heard.
You heard the same thing?
I heard some of those Mutt Lange tracks. You ever the masters get copied and then people float them around. Have you ever heard any of his?
Well, what can I say? Maybe.
Are you the guy that did it?
No, I'm not. But I mean, are they legal? I don't know. Yeah, everybody has them. Or lots of people have them, I should say.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I have them somewhere on the drive. I don't even know where, but it was cool to hear some of that stuff.
It's unbelievable.
It seemed like every track on the drums had that same snare, the sound that you hear on the record. It was across all the tracks. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know how he was doing it.
No telling that those multi-tracks are accurate to what actually was on the tape either.
Yeah.
Somebody could have.
Yes, it's interesting. You can I haven't tried it on much, but you can take some of those stuff and, you can mimic it fairly well. The Beatles ones, they have the stereo file at the bottom, so you can sit there and kind of rematch it when they were running 2 4-tracks together, which is crazy. But my favorite ones, and being a fan of the Queen ones, because you've got like, you know, on Killer Queen, you got that anytime, and it's 16 vocals, and it's all on one track. It just goes anytime, and then boom, disappears again.
Right.
In the middle of a track.
I've heard one of those, and I recall the pianos were doubled.
Pianos were doubled. Yeah.
And I asked Roy Thomas Baker about that. I did a Grammy thing with Roy.
It's so perfectly doubled.
And I asked him, I go, what the heck?
How would he do that? Yeah.
And he said that Freddie played it. And he said he got on there was a bright piano and then a more traditional sounding piano. And he said he got on the piano and just replayed it. He liked the sound of that piano and he just doubled it.
Yeah, no, it's crazy.
And it's kind of hard to hear in the mix, but it's there. That's the sound.
Yeah, it sounds like a tack piano and a grand piano.
Yep.
Yeah. And it's just hard to believe that it's that tight, but it just feels so good.
Yeah.
It doesn't feel edited tight like we would be nowadays. It just feels performed tight.
Yeah.
But the other thing is the bleed of the bass in all the drums is insane.
I do that. Any chance I get, I let the bass bleed in the drums.
And another thing I love is that the two sources of the bass, the DI and the amp, are like sort of weirdly out of phase with each other. Like they're not you can't flip them. Obviously in those days you couldn't nudge it back. It was even pre-digital delay, so there was no way of, you know, at least by the 80s or late 70s, you'd run delay lines and move the phase. So it's, you know, they couldn't look at it. So they would just be like, oh, that sounds good. And it challenges my personal ideas about bass phase, because I get a little obsessed with it. I don't know about you, but I get the three sources and I want everything to be time aligned perfectly to get it really fat and bottom endy. And then I listen to John Deacon's bass tone and go, that's amazing, but it's not perfectly in phase. What do I know, you know?
Right.
It challenges my ideas of what's right.
Right. In Pro Tools, when you have your, you know, you have, what is it called?
Time adjust.
Time adjust.
Yeah.
So I think that's a useful tool.
It is, yeah.
If you want to fool around with the bass, it comes into handy, especially if you're recording a DI.
Yeah.
And depending on where you are, that DI might be out of phase from the bass, or it might be back however many samples or whatever. If you fool with it, you can usually get the bass to sound better. It's a good trick in the mix, right?
Yeah. But then you pull up the Queen tracks and they're ever so slightly out of phase, but it's the sound. And I'm like, oh.
The Disturbed bass was on tape, so what you had was what you had.
Yeah. Do you remember how many inputs you were using on bass?
I think it was just a DI and an amp. An amp peg.
Amp peg.
Mm-hmm. Yep. I can't remember exactly which amp peg head. I've always got a couple of amp peg heads in a cab around the studio. Was it an 810, an SVT, or a 50? 810. 810? Yep. Any particular miking thing that you liked? Or was it one of those what was there at the time situations? I can't remember. That's right. I think a Neumann. A Neumann, right. I think maybe a TLM 170. Oh, interesting. Yeah. Nice. Which was on the vocal and on the bass and everything. I like that mic. I still use that mic all the time. I love it. But, when I didn't have any money and I had to get a good mic, and I got I just got the equipment dealer to give me a bunch of mics, and I would just listen. And that's, of all the Neumanns that I could possibly afford at the time, that was the one that I liked the best. I liked it better than the 87. Sure. Just because it had a little more punch, more low end. So I like an 87. I like the traditional mics, the old school traditional mics, the 87s, all that stuff's the best, I think. Right. Yeah, technology's getting crazy though. It's like, there used to be when we were kids, the difference between the inexpensive and the expensive was vast. But I mean, these days you can buy $300, $400, $500 mics that just sound like the mics that we used to associate with $2,000 mics. It's absolutely crazy. Yeah, I have a couple of mics that I like, but when you really, really get down and listen, I think the difference is there. Sure. It's just not a lot. Yeah.
I'm a firm believer in if you just make everything a tiny bit better across the board, everything is better by the end. That little extra care and detail and attention is
I
huge.
think it's a good philosophy to have. Someone said, why are you going crazy about this sound or this little detail? No one will ever notice. And I said, it's not this little detail. It's all these little details that are cumulative from now until the end of the project. That's what's going to make it great. So it's just a good habit to be in to, not to the point of dragging the session down, of course.
Of course, yeah. Yeah.
So you do have to keep things rolling. You have to keep the energy up. The performance ultimately is number one. But when you can, sweat the details.
So you were telling me, how did you meet Cameron? Because you have a similar story.
Oh, well, Cameron got a band. He was demoing a band back in the day. He had a little studio. I can't remember where. Somewhere in the OC, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And he demoed this band, and they had gotten a record deal. And it wasn't too far after that first Disturbed record came out, and I was getting a lot of calls, and I met this band, and I really liked their music, and I wound up getting the gig. And Cameron was the engineer of the demos, and the band said, "We really love this guy. We want you to." I got the gig. We want you to, let him engineer with you. And I didn't know. I mean, I heard the demos and they were okay. But now it's coming
on the Disturbed record, you'd done everything.
Yeah.
You'd been the engineer, the producer, and you'd done.
I'm usually the engineer.
Yeah.
So it doesn't matter if I bring in an assistant because I'm gonna.
Sure.
I started out as a studio guy, engineering everything, and then became a producer. I started out as a musician and then a studio guy. So then once I got a good handle on the studio and, I started injecting my musical opinions.
Sure.
And that led to, bands in cities starting to get record deals, bands that I recorded.
Great.
At one point, it seemed like any band I recorded would have got a deal.
Wonderful.
I mean, it seemed like that for a while. And then after Disturbed did their record, then I got busy and I couldn't work with local bands pretty much anymore.
Was there any other bands that became successful that you'd...
That demoed? Well, there was a band called Loudmouth that I demoed, and they got signed, and then the single that did well was the demo, but I didn't get to produce the record.
Right.
But the first single, Fly, was actually a demo. I tracked it in my house on the TAC Magnum and the Tascam tape machine.
Nice.
24 track. So that was before Disturbed. But I got, there was no chance I was getting to produce that record for whatever reason. But the demo sounded as good as the record, I thought. The band thought too, I think. I think Disturbed took note of that. I think that was
great.
That might have been a factor in them, besides being stand-up guys, I think that they also...
They saw the proof of the pudding.
Well, I think that there was the unknown.
Yep.
Could be scary, right? Because what
Sure.
if you get somebody else and then the sound changes and it's the sound that they were liking? So that band, then there was another band called Soil that I demoed that got signed. They were on J Records, Clive Davis record. Not a lot of rock records on that label, but that was another one that I did. A band called Relative Ash got signed to Island Def Jam.
Great.
So yeah, there was within a matter of a year, there was like 4 or a year and a half or whatever, 4 record deals.
That's pretty successful.
That was a pretty good run. And then there were more. A band called Caviar, also to Island Def Jam.
Caviar? I remember Caviar.
They had the song Tangerine Speedo at the end of Charlie's. If you watch a Charlie's Angels movie, the first one.
I remember that band.
At the end of that, it's the first song in the rolling credits.
Of course, they're such a Chicago band. I remember them. The singer used to date Nina.
Yes.
What's his name?
So you do. You have good...
I remember that.
Good memory.
Yeah. I'm a musical junkie, probably like yourself. When we're in this, you know what I mean? We just remember the weirdest, most random things.
So I did that record as well. And I think there were more,
Right.
but there was a bunch of, within a short period of time where I was still.
So basically you Cameron engineered that record with you?
Oh yeah. We got,
it's just interesting because you had that experience of missing the opportunities and being given one, and now you're able to give back.
Well, I didn't write. I asked Loudmouth, I said, can I even, can I be the assistant? I know you're not going to hire me, and that sucks, but how about, give me a little bit of money, I'll come out to LA and they said, no, they don't, they can't do it that way. They got their own guys and everything, and it just wasn't going to happen. So yeah, I was happy to give Cameron the try.
Great.
And he exceeded my expectations.
Oh, yeah.
You could tell, you could just tell that guy, I can't say enough good things about him.
Yeah, he's such a sweetheart, so easygoing.
And he was the guy that found that API. And then he said, Johnny, you got to check out this board.
He told me that, yeah.
And then I checked it out. I'm like, I'm in. And then he said, well, I think I'm going to try it. I know. I didn't hesitate. I saw that board and I said, I got to buy this board. And then he said, well, I want to try and get the board, I said, you found it, of course, by all means, you got first dibs. And as it turned out, the deal wasn't going to work for him. And I wound up buying the board, but then I didn't have a place to put it. So I put it in his studio anyway. So he wound up with the board.
For years, yeah.
And I was there probably for 10 years.
Yeah, I think you said something like that, yeah. It's
so,
great.
And, I got to I tracked a record on it down there, and it was great.
I love that little room he has.
I remember mixing the drums on the record that I tracked on that board there, and just thinking, man, this it's got a little mojo. It's got something. And it was a long time ago that I tracked on it, until recently at the Cave in Nashville, where I tracked the Rattlers on it and was reminded
Wonderful.
of why,
And it looks amazing because it's white. It's white API.
Yeah. It's white and it just sounds awesome.
It's amazing.
And, the guys at House of Blues, Gary Bells, got his team in there and they went through the whole thing, and
beautiful.
We gave it a good once over with the Q-tips and everything, cleaned it up. But yeah, it's great. T-Bone was on it. He liked it. Everybody loves it. Joe Walsh just tracked on it recently. Nice. So, little by little, it's it'll have a chance to get heard. Obviously, I don't think Cameron tracked. So Cameron's career, obviously, as we know, he went on and did a bunch of Motorhead records.
Yeah, like 6 albums, I think.
Unbelievable.
A couple live albums, 4 or 5 studio albums, yeah.
Yeah.
And it was good for me because I grew up a Motorhead fan. I bought Ace of Spades when it came out. I bought The Girls' School, St. Valentine's Day Massacre, which of course is named after the famous thing in Chicago. Yeah. Wasn't St. Valentine's Day Massacre in Chicago?
Valentine's Day Massacre?
Yeah, in Chicago, yeah. Mm-hmm. So I grew up a fan of Motorhead, and I don't want to diss anybody, but the records by the 90s were sounding not very good. And then they started sounding good again.
Yeah, I think that's in the 90s when I thought, I should be a record producer because the records that I love sounded way better than what I thought,
was happening at the time.
Was happening.
Yeah, so I picked up the 2000 records and was like, who's this guy Cameron Webb? Because he got the spirit back. And it's interesting because we're talking about like not overthinking, I suppose. Maybe I'm oversimplifying what we're talking about. We're talking more about capturing and we broke down a song together and it's like barely edited, it's just all performances. And there's Lemmy, I'm sure you've heard the tracks, Lemmy doing like 3 different bass parts at the same time. And they're all, if you solo them, you're all like, it's kind of messy. If you put them against the drums, you're like, it's genius. It's just like there's 3 bass tracks playing parts that complement each other with the drums and with the guitars, as opposed to like taking the drums, then editing the bass to the drums, then doing another bass part and editing that bass part to that bass part to bum, and you end up with this 3 perfectly played in time, in phase stuff, but with 0 personality.
Right.
Because he had that, that groove that's the Lemmy groove.
Right.
Doesn't work. Dun 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 dun. It has to frickin' do this, which is an intangible thing that I could never edit, that no human being could ever edit.
Right, and with the editing at your fingertips, it takes a wise producer to
Step
know
away.
when to lay off.
Yeah.
And say, this is good.
Maybe that's part of it. Maybe it's a big part of it. But that was, I think, felt like the difference between the Motorhead that we grew up loving, the Ace of Spades, the Overkill era, St. Valentine's Day Massacre era, kind of classic Motorhead, to this sort of lost 90s, trying to be modern rock.
Mm-hmm.
Who gives a crap? Why aren't they just Motorhead? And then they came back. And
Right.
Yeah, so
Well, Cameron's, he gets it.
He gets it, yeah.
With the project we did, I remember very well that we did it at Ocean Studios in Burbank on that Neve. They had a big Neve there. But I remember the room. We had a line of amps.
Huge.
We had different room mics all around that room, different
massive
ribbon mics,
wow.
44s and 77s and all this stuff all over. And it was all on the board. So all the inputs were being used. And we would just bring up a room mic and bus it to a track. Oh, I don't like this one. Let's try this one. While people are playing guitar. So every track had a room mic because it was Pro Tools and you had endless tracks. It was really fun to do. And that record, those tracks I really enjoyed the way those sounded.
What was the band?
The Color Red.
Color Red.
Yeah. And the record, was one of those that didn't, for the ones that you win, that you have that, the surprise. This was one that just somehow it slipped through the cracks. I didn't expect it to.
Yeah, I always feel for me, a couple of the things that I've done that I've put so much love and attention and thought were going to be great didn't really succeed. And then ones that I was like, yeah, that might do well. Those are the ones that do well. It's kind of a catch-22. And of course, there's obviously loads of exceptions, but it's sometimes a bit of a bummer when you fall in love with something and you put your heart and soul into it, and for whatever reason, it doesn't connect. At least for me.
I think it has to connect at the record company first.
Yeah.
They have to love it.
Yeah.
And then, of course, there's always decisions, right? They don't have endless money. I don't think they can promote every record with all the money. I think they have to choose sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
We've got this amount of money to promote. This one seems like it's got a little something going on. I think you can be a victim to that. I think it happens.
Yeah,
it sucks
absolutely.
when it does. How do you? Nobody has a crystal ball.
Yeah.
And then there are the records where the record company isn't looking at them.
Yep.
And they let the A&R guy sign it or whatever. They say, okay. They let him put his neck out, and it starts to catch organically. And then the record company wasn't expecting it, and then they jump in and.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing.
That seems like that's more of the exception than the rule, but I think the record company has to hear it and get excited and really want to go for it. Yeah. Now that was then. Now, who knows?
Yeah, all bets are off now.
I don't know. Yeah. Now,
radio's pop music. It's only pop music when it comes to top 40s.
Yeah.
With the couple of
alternative music sounds very much like pop music these days as well.
Sure. Yeah.
So, and there aren't a lot of, the big cities don't have rock stations anymore. You have to get outside of Chicago or LA or New York to hear a rock radio station.
Yeah, where are like the big modern rock bands like Pop Evil and Black Veil Brides, where are they getting played?
Right.
I actually don't know if they're on. Looking at you there, Eric, native of California. What's the radio stations that play that?
Where do you hear Pop Evil here?
Yeah, do you hear Pop Evil here?
I don't know if those are on an actual station. Those are more of just like people that actually go to shows now.
Wow.
But it's like my age group, the youngins that are rebelling, those guys that are actually going to shows, and
yeah,
that's, yeah.
I love those shows. Those are good shows. When you go to what they have, the Open Air Fest in Chicago, and it was Disturbed and Pop Evil and Alter Bridge and all these kind of bands, and just a huge stadium full of people.
Yep.
I don't know, 30, 40,000. I mean, just ridiculous. Tons of people. Or Rock on the Range, those kind of fests. It's really something. You would think that they would have a radio station. Chicago has, the north suburbs have Will Rock, which is kind of like a border between Wisconsin and Chicago. And they play a lot of those records. Pop Evil, which is a band that I produced a couple records with them as well.
Yeah, great sounding stuff.
I mixed the first one, and then a guy out here did the second one that I did with them, and he did a great job. What's his name?
I don't remember.
Forgetting.
Yeah.
Awesome mixing though.
Great. And they've been writing with a bunch. They write with Bassett, don't they?
Yeah.
Yeah. He's a great writer.
Yep. I wrote some on that last record.
Great.
I
mean, they have #1 modern rock singles.
Yeah.
They do really well.
The Bassett tracks usually.
Yeah. Well, yeah.
But I had four co-writes on that record.
Great.
Which was fun.
But Bassett's a great guy. He's really, I did.
Fantastic.
I did a Struts track with him that he wrote, and we cut it at sunset. And
oh, wow.
Yeah, just no ego. Come in here, have some fun, make it work.
Yeah.
You know, that's what it's all about.
Yep. I like the tracks that he does with them. He's great.
I think he's very guttural and just gets down to like what works.
Yeah.
The songs that I know that he writes are always just like.
I mean, if I was an artist, I'd want to go there and write a song with him.
Yeah. Yeah. What could hurt?
Just to exactly.
Yeah.
I'd like to see his process. You did it.
No, I worked with him. I recorded a Struts track that he had written with them.
I see.
Yeah. So I wasn't in the room when he was writing.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, but I mean, as a guy, he's super easygoing and
right.
And he also did some Hey Violet stuff.
I think he was in a band in Chicago.
Yeah, he has an interesting story about U2 that he was thinking about. I should probably save that for a Dave Bassett interview because his story about U2 is very interesting.
Uh-oh.
Yeah. No, in a positive way, how they kind of like got him back in to do music when he wasn't sure early on in his career.
Huh.
So, yeah.
Interesting.
Well, it's tough. Like, you know, what your experience, for instance, you sign 3 or 4 bands and they're playing your single on the radio, but you're not cutting the record. And the reason why, heck, let's be honest, the reason why people go and buy a record is because you've got a hit single. So you've got the hit single, but somebody else got paid the $300,000 to make the record or whatever it was in those days.
That hurt.
Yeah. Yeah.
That sucks. But the good news is the one that I did get.
Yeah. It's bigger still.
Turned out to be the one that mattered.
Yeah. Who's to say that if you hadn't done the other one, that one wouldn't have mattered?
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, that's your career, right?
Mm-hmm.
Hopefully.
Yeah.
It's crazy, you know. I mean, you just don't know. The producer job it's people have different processes. People bring different things to the table, right? So as a producer, they try to quantify what it is that you do, but it's not really that way, I don't think.
No, I agree. And having a rapport with the band is a huge, huge thing. And if you've got that with the band trusts you, you trust the band.
Maybe that's overrated.
Yeah. I don't know. I
Rick Rubin maybe is hands off, and I think that there's value there. You're not too chummy with the band. You have no rapport. You keep a bit of a distance, and you can see the big picture.
The only Rick albums I've been involved in are on the pre-production level.
Mm-hmm.
I've done pre-production with bigger bands that he's produced, so I'm just the guy recording the demos in the room. Sometimes it's multi-track, sometimes it was running DATs when I was a kid. I was in my 20s. And I will say the records that he made, that I was around that were being made, for me, what made them successful, in my humble opinion, was he worked the arse off of those bands in pre-production. Like they would do 3 to 4 months at least of pre-production, some of these.
Yeah.
And I think that probably, and this is a humble opinion, everybody can disagree, that's probably why those records were successful, because by the time they went into the studio, they all knew their parts. They'd all played the songs 100 times at least. And it was more about hiring a really amazing engineer to capture it. And it also keeps the record simple.
Right.
Because it's made in pre-production. And I'm preaching to the choir. But, everybody knew their part, what to play. And then it was all just like getting that groove. And there's one thing that I do love about Rick Rubin records is when you listen to a Chili Peppers record, for instance, is it's usually one, maybe two guitars, bass and drums, and the guys sound like they're in a room playing, And even with the Weezer stuff he did, it's usually stereo guitars, bass and drums. So
Yes.
maybe that sort of standoff approach works if the pre-production is there. That's just my opinion.
I think there's other benefits, right?
Yeah.
You can, if you're the guy that sat there all day tracking the guitar, your ears can get fatigued.
Sure.
You may not hear something that's out of tune. You may, if you come in fresh as the producer and you say, hey, that's out of tune there. I think that I think there's a value to
Sure.
staying fresh. And also, if you kill yourself on a record, you can get fatigued and lose energy as far as evaluating the mixes and mastering.
Sure.
At the end of the project, you just can't bear to listen to it anymore. You've been living and breathing it for months. So I don't know. I see value in both sides. I'm a very hands-on producer.
So am I, but I'm wondering if.
But I don't not. I've had the experience of working with engineers, and I like it. I like keeping it. I like being hands-on, and I like being there with the guitar tracks and all that stuff. I enjoy it.
Yeah, it's amazing.
But I also, I don't know if I see a big difference whether I'm sitting there tracking the guitars or coming and evaluating. But
Right.
I will help set up, even if I'm doing something more hands-off, I will help set up the tones
Great.
of what I think, because, I like to engineer too.
Yeah, I like to engineer, and I also like to commit. I like to commit, and I sometimes if you, I don't know, you've probably worked with a lot more skilled engineers than I have as a producer. So,
I engineer all my records pretty much. So
Yeah.
I'm not working with engineers usually.
Yeah.
Cameron I've worked with.
Yeah. I like the idea of like the guitar sound. And what was interesting when we broke down that Motorhead song was the guitar sounds when he mixed them, there was like a little 5K boost and some low rumble rolled off, and that was the same tone he recorded.
Right.
And like the tiniest boost, the tiniest roll off. And that was the guitar sound.
Of course.
So he'd committed to it. But I've been in so many situations where I'm sure you have as well, where it's printed so flat and so nondescript that you're like boosting this to try and get some air out of it, and its low mids are lacking, and or the opposite, where I get stuff to hand it to mix where I've got 5 mics on the guitar, and I'm like, which combination works?
Oh yeah.
And these two
What did
actually,
they have in mind?
Yeah, these two phase cancel. So
Right.
maybe they should have flipped that one. Maybe it's supposed to be flipped, and I don't know that. It's not in the notes. All of these different sort of
I'm
scenarios.
not a fan of mixing when I get 5 guitar tracks or 4,
Yeah.
different mics. Yeah, so making the Seven Dust record was great. As you're talking about that whole genre, they were
Sure.
one of those bands that everyone toured with and everyone looked up to.
Yeah, they were sort of before the Godsmacks and the
Yeah.
Disturbs.
And just great live band, great, everybody's
Amazing live
so
band.
talented in that band. So, we were working on this record, and I do think that their process was a little different. They were kind of they wanted to hear mix as you go kind of thing. And I guess my philosophy is I don't like to mix as I go. In Pro Tools, it's real easy to throw an EQ on something or to fool with stuff, but I feel like I like my tones the way I'm tracking them, and I don't
Sure.
want to hear them any different. And I want to track my overdubs to the sounds that I recorded, so everything is balanced. If it all needs to be brighter, it'll all be relatively brighter in the mix. If it all needs to be fatter, but everything is relative when you track.
Yeah, I agree.
And I feel like everything was pretty right on the money when I was tracking it, but you got a band with a lot of experience and doing things their own way. They've been around, and a lot DIY, So it was interesting, but I think, it wasn't until the mix that was the turning point when they started to get excited about their own record. But we worked hard, and it was fun. I go back to the YouTube videos that they put out, and you see that, there was a lot of fun. But they were working hard too. That's a working band. They would be in the studio. They would go away and tour and then come back. They'd go on the weekend and play gigs, which if you can avoid it, I would say to a band, don't try to be playing live shows in the middle of your album. Sometimes it's inevitable, but.
Yeah, I've had it happen a couple of times. But yeah, for singers and stuff. Ooh.
Yeah. I remember Lejean, I was using a Neumann M149 on his vocal, and I remember in the vocal booth that we kept blowing the mic out and sending it. I had 3 of those, and we kept, for whatever reason, they kept going. And he was doing the side of a war, like a fighter jet. He was putting the X on the microphone. Just how many times he...
Wow.
But, that was a good experience, and I like that record a lot. I get a lot of all the records I've done, a lot of people will mention that record.
Seven Dust was a great band. I remember touring with Godsmack. We opened for them for about 3 months and watching that whole genre just explode all over the country. And then we would turn up in New York. We played the Bowery Ballroom to 8 people.
Oh, boy.
Nobody got it. And then we couldn't get shows in LA with that genre at all in 99. Nobody got it.
Huh.
And I came back to LA after the long tour, and I just told everybody, so it's great they're playing ska punk on K-Rock, but it's going to change. It's going to get huge. And within 6 months, it was like Metallica were back on the radio.
Oh, yeah.
It was suddenly when you're like, wait there's late 80s, early 90s Metallica back on K-Rock in 99, 2000. And Godsmack, Disturbed, and all those bands just... But Seven Dust, we played a show... I think it was the Palace or the Play, whatever it was, and it was Skunk and Nancy, Godsmack, and Seven Dust. And Seven Dust just blew everybody off the stage. There's more of them. They're more energetic. You had lots of dreads flying around all over the place. I mean, it was just really high energy show.
I remember 99, right before Disturbed got signed, I remember seeing Stained and Kid Rock.
Stained. Oh, Stained played that same show.
Stained was opening for Kid Rock.
Oh, wow.
At the House of Blues in Chicago. It was kind of a club tour, 1,000 people room.
Yeah.
What a show that was.
Yeah.
That was right in the early days of all that stuff. And I was there with the Disturbed guys. We were doing demos, and they were there trying to give their demos to,
Oh, wow.
Or was it in advance of the record? I can't recall, but it was right in that time. Going way back. It was
probably one of the last big groundswells.
Yeah.
Because for, growing up, that was the way it worked. The labels didn't know what was going on. There was a natural groundswell. There was bands touring. They were building up audiences. And then they started noticing, we better get in on this.
Right.
And they started signing bands. But that was always traditionally how it worked. And it feels like, in my humble opinion, that was the last time it was like that. And now I feel like it's a little bit more.
I'm concerned that bands are being rewarded these days for being good at Facebook.
Right.
Or being good at YouTube.
Right.
And not being, good at music.
Right.
Good at recording music or making music.
Right.
But I think label says, well, they're well known. They have this amount of social media going on. So that is enough to get a label backing. Get a label behind the band. I think that just seems, philosophically, it seems weird to me. It's what about the best music?
Yeah. But the thing I think, I agree with that 100%, but the thing with Seven Dust and then with Godsmack is just seeing those bands around that period is they worked their butts off.
That was before, that's what I'm saying, that was before the YouTube and Facebook stuff, that the current, so you're saying that was the last groundswell.
Exactly.
Because the game has changed.
Yeah.
So there is no groundswell. There's a social media swell.
Yeah.
And that's what is making it work. But, look, social media, YouTube, that it favors novelty oftentimes.
Sure.
It doesn't necessarily represent the best music, in my opinion. It represents
I agree.
Entertainment and of any value. whatever, I don't know, novelty, comedic, or
Sure.
just, I mean, the fact that cat videos have millions of views shows you the value of, what those, I mean, really, that's like,
We need to bring out a cat here so we can up our viewer rating, I think maybe. Nobody hears
exactly. I think that if you had a cat doing something silly,
Mm-hmm.
but so how do you, where do you go as a producer these
Sure.
days? Where does a producer go and say, okay, look, labels value music that's as popular as a cat doing something silly on YouTube. And that's the barometer of what it takes to get a record deal. But it really should be, you read these comments like, I liked music when ugly people were allowed to make it or something like that. You know what I mean? Like the
Yeah.
70s bands before
Sure.
image and marketing, took precedence over quality musicianship or those other things. I don't know. I mean, not to say that all new music's bad. I like a lot of it.
No, a lot of it's great. I hear you.
It's different.
Yeah, I hear you. But it sounds like, you're doing like, you're talking about doing live stuff with stand-up bass and stuff. That's one of the things like, with like the Chris Stapleton record Getting Big that Dave Cobb did. I mean, it's the same kind of philosophy, I love Dave as a producer, but essentially what he did was not screw it up. He basically threw up some mics. He'll tell you, just let the guys perform and recorded it. And
Get
put
good
it out.
recordings, yeah.
Yeah, great recordings, capturing great performances. And that's the part of the modern industry that I do like.
Yeah.
It's great to see that gets a chance, that gets to be successful, that gets to win Grammys. That's all good feeling for me. So it's
I like that too. I'm
the thing I want to encourage, not that I have a platform to do it, because the people that watch this are people that like you and I, but the one thing I want to encourage is bands to aspire to be that. Because it's sort of a catch-22, isn't it? They're like, well, why don't I just, put out a couple of videos and see if they go viral.
right.
But then that Chris Stapleton is basically, he was a songwriter on tons of hits and plays shows and works stupidly hard to get to that
Right.
place.
Well, think about it this way. These control room records, I call them,
Mm-hmm.
and some of them are great, and some of them catch on and get very successful. But I think what they lack, because a lot of it, the sounds are canned, they're coming from a computer, which anyone can buy, or a software synth or something like that. But I think it's very difficult for them to match the soul in an actual live performance.
Sure, I agree.
An artist that has soul, and you get to record them, the soul of a performance, the nuance of a live guitar take is unique.
Absolutely.
There's only one, but
Yeah.
there are synth guys and DJ guys that are putting sounds in, and they're great at it, and they have a talent, and I would not want to take anything away from that, but those sounds are there, and I know they manipulate them and run them through filters, and they do their own cool stuff, but it's not a performance per se.
Sure.
I don't know what it is, a mix, or you know what I mean?
Yeah, no, I hear you.
It's built, it's assembled, it's parts, it's pieces put together and manipulated to make something.
Yeah, I
And
think
it has an energy.
definitely. I think the difficulty for us is just that the fact that these things, they used to live together. Now I think the problem for a lot of us is just that the pop radio is purely that now, where we go back 20 years and everything lived together. So you could have your Beyonce kind of pop world at the same time you might have Soundgarden's latest single or whatever it is. And not even, it's just, now it's very dominated by one genre. And I think that's the thing that's a little, that's the most unfortunate
There's
thing.
always the oddball in pop. You can look at the charts and say, okay, manufactured. If you go down the Hot 100 and
Sure.
you just manufactured. But there's always something that
There's
gets
always the
in there.
outlier, yeah.
You
Yeah, Neil with 21 Pilots. I mean, number one single.
yeah.
Like
it's-
Rihanna, Beyonce, blah, 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 21 Pilots.
Right.
Yeah. So.
There have been those. There always seems to be one in there.
Yeah.
So, something that's, or even, like, there will always be a guy playing an acoustic guitar and singing a song.
Sure. Yeah, Ed Sheeran. Yeah. Yeah, it's perfect.
So, a great song with the minimal production does seem to find its way into the public eye, as much as any pop overproduced,
sure,
overmixed track. So there always seems to be one of those floating around, and I like those. I root for those.
Yeah, absolutely.
I want to see those. Not that I hate the other stuff. I like it. I think pop music's been pretty good lately, actually.
Yeah, we just had lunch, and that, what was that song? Oh, Ophelia, and I'm just like, I'm like, I hate that chorus.
Yeah. I think that pop music's having its moment right now. It's been good.
Yeah.
The production is good. The songwriting is there's a lot of cool stuff going on.
Definitely. All right. Well, thank you ever so much.
But I root for rock and always will.
Yeah. I mean, I picked up a guitar. I wanted to be Brian May. I grew up in England listening to Queen records. So, that's just where I come from. But
so I'll end by saying this.
Please.
The world will end before anyone creates a better instrument than the electric guitar. And you can quote me on that.
Okay. I like that. Can we have that as like Chiron on the bottom? Let's have that as a Chiron on the bottom, Eric, okay? Well, thank you ever so much again.
All right. Thanks.
Appreciate it.
Good chatting with you.
Good to chat with you. Please, as ever, leave a bunch of comments and questions below. And if there's some really good ones, I might help Johnny to see what your response is.
SM57. I just answered all the questions.
Marvelous. Thanks, mate.